Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. Once again, too much has happened for me to make a Q&A video. This is a more political sphere kind of video, which is something I normally don't delve into, but it sort of overlaps with some of the previous videos that I've talked about. I've touched on pantheism and a few minor occult issues. I think that yesterday's events regarding again, I'm not going to use his name because everybody knows who I'm talking about, and it would keep any kind of algorithm from screwing up the post itself. But the idea of human sacrifice, modern human sacrifice. When people think of human sacrifice, they think of, tribal people, slitting prisoners' throats for, the sun god or whatever. But as I've mentioned in previous videos, whenever you have multiple people working together, they create something greater than themselves, and they create a higher consciousness. And that consciousness, you can call it an egregore, you can call it a tulpa. I think traditionally, that's really, it would constitute a deity at that point. And I think that the events of yesterday could really be closely compared to two very controversial topics regarding both political parties in the United States as well as other parts of the world. And that would be abortion, which is often associated with left-wing mentality, and capital punishment, which is often associated with a right-wing mentality. And they often, in this country at least, they criticize one another for supporting one and not the other. You often hear conservatives say, yeah, they want to kill babies, but they want murderers to get off free. And then on the flip side, you hear the left wing say, yeah, they do anything to protect a child before it's born, and then once it's born, they don't care, and then it grows up to be a criminal, and then they kill it. And I think that's an interesting perspective on both sides, the criticism that they're pointing out, because they're looking at the flaws of the other side, but they're not considering the accuracy of that criticism in relation to their own view. And the reason why I point this out is, I mentioned in a previous video that I'm against capital punishment, generally speaking. Well, I think it's interesting to note that, the left wing and the right wing, in some respects, they worship different deities. They work together, and it creates different higher consciousnesses that they're opposed to one another for. I mean, you can actually see this with, Hillary and Podesta and Soros and all the creepy stuff they do, as well as some creepy stuff that the right does that gets a little swept under the rug, I think, at least. But the reason I'm pointing this out is, whenever you have a religion, whenever you're trying to elevate these states of consciousness that result from multiple people, these gods, what's the best way to appease them? What's the best way to get their attention? What's the best way to increase their power, and as such, increase the power of the group? This is something we see throughout human history, and that is sacrifice. And agricultural gods, they often accept agricultural gifts, but then war gods, they accept very different gifts. And we certainly are a war god culture at this point. Abraham Lincoln Monument, if you really study it, it's not so much a peaceful guy in a stovepipe hat. It's really more like a war god at this point. Very similar to Guan Yu in many respects, interestingly, or not Guan Yu. Guan Yu. The reason I'm pointing this out is I think that the parallels between Planned Parenthood and capital punishment at these private prisons, they make me think of that book Unwind, which is I think everyone should read because it's chilling. But I don't think it's a moral issue is where I'm going with this. In the case of capital punishment and abortion, it's not about guilt and innocence. It is to your average person who's looking at it just on a human empathic level. But really, it's about flavor. It's about which deity you're trying to appease and what kind of sacrifice they prefer. And I absolutely think that when someone who is part of an occult group, like the fellow yesterday, who does despicable things, when they are ultimately killed, it's not just a question of we gotta make this guy quiet. I think that's a naive perspective. I think that is a spiritually bankrupt perspective. It's not just about that. It's also about making things right with the being that they serve. And in this case, the being that they serve, the sum total of all the people who agree with that group's thinking and their values, that creates an egregore, that creates a deity, and the best way to improve relations with that deity is through human sacrifice. So that's what this video is about. What I'm saying, effectively, is human sacrifice is not a primitive, archaic institution. It is still very much in vogue. It is still very effective, and it is something that both sides engage in, just in different ways. And there is a massive, massive body count that corresponds to the wishes of these groups, and both are absolutely despicable in my opinion in that sense, because I'm very opposed to any kind of sacrifice, human being the absolute worst you can engage in. You can study all this for yourself. Highly encourage you to. That's really it. It's not just politics, is what I'm saying. Religion and politics have always been intertwined, and unfortunately, in the modern era, in this Kali Yuga, both parties are engaged in despicable spiritual warfare with one another. The peak indication of which is that both sides engage in human sacrifice. Thanks. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions, and hopefully next week we can do a Q&A video again. Yeah.